So, I was going to try and write a somewhat lengthy introduction of video games as a whole, but there's literally no point in doing so because the people who end up clicking on this video already have a good idea of what they are. We all most likely picked up a controller and played a video game for the first time at a very young age and continued to do so a million times since then. I wouldn't know, as I made a whole video talking about my experience playing a certain game as a child. Go watch that, please! But that specific game you played for the first time ever most likely was a Nintendo game like Mario or Donkey Kong, or it could have been a game on PlayStation or Xbox. The universal reason why this could be the case is due to their popularity as well as the overall quality of their gameplay. However, for as long as video games have been around, we have had a lot of very poorly designed games that pop up in the market even to this day. And that is why I'm here to talk about the worst video games iceberg. An iceberg chart is basically a series of points that relate to a specific topic that get more and more obscure as you go deeper down in the iceberg. I will be using this chart made by Reddit user Raging Rowan, and as you can see, this may take a while. Also, keep in mind, after receiving plenty of lovely comments from my Goosebumps iceberg video, some points may be shorter than others, and that's because there are some points in this chart I am very familiar with and will have a lot to say about, but for the points I don't have any personal experience with, I won't have a lot to say about them except for why they are bad. Of course, I am doing my research and looking up any form of media that involves a certain point, so no need to throw a fit in the comments. But anyways, sit back, grab something to eat because explaining this whole chart will take a while. And if you have any issues with the video or what I have to say about the points, please feel free to correct me in the comments. Now, let's begin the breakdown. Big Rigs Over-the-Road Racing. This 2003 racing game was developed by Stellar Stone and published by Game Mill. The game allows the player to pick a large semi-truck to drive and a map to race on, making this the only option of gameplay Big Rigs has to offer. You will take one look at this game and clearly tell that nobody tested before released. Many mechanics are broken, such as the cars you race against, which move so unbelievably slow and cannot even pass the finish line, therefore making it impossible to lose, and the fact you can apparently pass through every building in the game and even fall through bridges. It is a perfect example of an untested game that a lot of people actually believe to be the worst game of all time. But we got a lot more on this list before we can call a specific game the worst of all time. Ride to Hell Retribution. It's safe to say that this is the video game equivalent to Tommy Wiseau's The Room. Ride to Hell released in 2013 and follows bikers in the 60s that, well, just kill people apparently. The game boasts bad controls, poorly designed motorcycle stages, and an annoying amount of quick-time events. The story is also said to falsely portray bikers as mindless killers, as I just alluded to, and every woman in the game is only there for the protagonist to dry hump them in the most unsexy ways possible. Seems like playing Ride to Hell Retribution is just hell. Action 52. This was an NES game that included 52 games in one, and it definitely was quantity over quality. They were almost entirely mediocre arcade-style games that could never replicate the fun that good arcade games had, but one specific game that was included with Action 52 was called Cheetah-Men. This was meant to be the premier game of Action 52, and it was not designed as an arcade game, but as a side-scroller with different levels. The company who created it was so sure it was going to be a hit, despite the fact that, after watching game footage, it seems like the company put as much effort into the game as the other games on Action 52. They began development on a sequel to Cheetah Man before Action 52 was even released. Of course, Action 52 flopped, and Cheetah Man 2, along with the planned toy line and comic series, were all cancelled. That is until a massive box of copies of Cheetah Man 2 were found during a warehouse break-in 5 years after its cancellation, and the legend of Cheetah Man and Action 52 became what it is today. What's interesting is that the copies of Cheetah Man 2 were just recycled copies of Action 52 with this golden sticker on the back that said Cheetah Man 2. For those who got their hands on this extremely rare game would find it an incomplete product, as the game would pretty much end after you beat the 4th level boss and you get stuck in limbo. Of course, people later found out that you can actually force the NES to start the game on the next levels if you turn it off and turn it back on over and over again. Don't tell me how they figured that out because I do not have an answer. Superman 64. Similar to Big Rigs, this is another example of a broken game that clearly wasn't tested before release. Most gamers are very familiar with this notorious game, which, by the way, a lot of people seem to miss this about Superman 64, but it's actually based off of the Superman animated series, which is one of the main reasons why it does not include the famous Superman theme written by John Williams. The biggest issue that many people have with this game is that you spend about 75% of the whole game flying Superman through an endless amount of rings with the most wonky controls ever made for an N64 game, then being followed by completing a quick task that does not really give you any time to think before starting it, followed by flying through more rings. This, along with the endless amount of glitches that this game has, gave this game the reputation that it has today, and most people agree that it is the worst video game based on a superhero ever made. E.T. for the Atari 2600. This is likely the most well-known entry in the whole Iceberg. E.T. for the Atari 2600 is widely regarded as the worst video game of all time, amongst all standards, and one of the main reasons why the video game market crashed in the early 80s. There really isn't a whole lot of things to say about it that has been said already, but despite what everyone says, E.T. most likely did not do as much damage to the video game market compared to another 2600 game that released around the same time. We will touch on that later in the Iceberg. Bubsy 3D. Bubsy was this cartoonish video game character that had a very short run in the 90s, and he was intended to be a mascot character like Mario and Sonic, but was never able to catch the attention of most consumers. He managed to be the star of many games across many platforms, but the one that officially killed him was Bubsy 3D for the PlayStation. The graphics were criticized for its blandness, and similar to Superman 64, many levels followed an objective that involves collecting certain things over and over again. Bubsy never had another game after this, and it makes sense why that is the case. Sonic the Hedgehog. Also known as Sonic 06, it's honestly surprising to see how Sonic managed to bounce back today from this commercial and critical failure of a game. I actually had this game at a point when I was very young, and I remember having a lot of trouble with it, which most likely was game related, of course. The game is extremely buggy, but what angered most fans was its story, which involves Sonic having this weird relationship with a human princess. Towards the end of the game, the princess kisses Sonic to save his life, and yeah, it's really uncomfortable to watch. Luckily, unlike Bubsy, Sonic continues to star in video games today, and of course now has movies that are making tons of money. Duke Nukem Forever. Duke Nukem unfortunately could not stay relevant going into the 2000s until this game finally came out in 2011. It was meant to serve as a reboot to the Duke Nukem series, but it did not end up going so far. Its criticisms revolved mostly around its juvenile tone throughout gameplay. It featured nudity, constant swearing, fecal humor, and many sexist jokes. I guess Duke Nukem Forever should have just been called Duke Nukem Temporary. Flatout 3 Chaos and Destruction. Flatout 3 compared to Big Rigs, from what I can infer, is a masterpiece. Unfortunately, that isn't saying much. Flatout 3 is plagued with bad sound effects and music, along with terrible character design and an absolutely broken physics system. I think I can understand why we never got a Flatout 4 now. Balan Wonderland. This game sadly became the product of an ambitious team at Square Enix who wanted to create a new entry in the dying world of platform games. Balan Wonderland was criticized for its repetitive elements scattered throughout this whole story, which involved NPC animations and overall gameplay. Many gamers felt that the whole product was very rushed and it ultimately sold very poorly in all markets, giving this once formidable project a depressing end to its run. Aliens Colonial Marines. Before we discuss the issues with this point, I gotta show you guys this clip from a trailer for this game.
First, if it moves, kill it. If it's not moving, kill it again. Eat that, ugly! Second, you've each got more firepower than an army platoon. Stay down! So use it. All of it. That's how you shoot! Third, you don't die unless I give you a direct order.
We need more dialogue like this in movies and video games. Anyways, Aliens Colonial Marines seems to be a mixed bag of negative and positive reviews, at least according to Metacritic. The game really just seems like a generic story shooter that people who are fans of the Alien franchise may have been really excited for when it was first announced, but has aged poorly over time. If anyone has played this game, feel free to comment your experience with playing them below. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5. Despite this game claiming to be the 5th in its series, it's more like the 20th, as Tony Hawk's Pro Skater is a pretty massive series of games. Tony Hawk 5 is a generic skating game with super choppy graphics that really does not bring anything new to the skating game genre, which has not really seemed to stick around going into the late 2010s and early 2020s. It sucks too, because I remember playing Tony Hawk games with my childhood friends over the years, and of course I played the skate games as well. Unfortunately, as the world progresses, some things just don't last long. GTA The Trilogy, The Definitive Edition. This game, which has an absolute mouthful of a title, was a 3-in-1 pack that included GTA 3, GTA Vice City, and GTA San Andreas. It was meant to be a remastering of all three of these games, but refined graphics did not fix the insane amount of glitches that popped up left and right during its first months on the market. A ton of videos were made shortly after its release in 2021, showing off all of the errors that the game boasted, and the company who helped Rockstar develop the compilation, Take-Two Interactive, finally responded to the wave of criticism with an apology, and many changes were made to the game. The final product that is available today is a lot more stable, thankfully, and is available to buy on most consoles. Night Trap. This extremely controversial game was released on the Sega CD and 3DO, and it follows a premise where you check security cameras inside of a house and prevent masked intruders from getting in by trapping them. And yes, the traps are as ridiculous as the traps in Home Alone. Check these out. Yeah. Despite these very cartoony elements, the game was met with a lot of backlash when it first came out. The controversy mostly stemmed from the graphic violence and scenes where the masked men act aggressively in a sexual way towards women. This, along with the controversy of Mortal Kombat, inspired the ESRB rating system, and you can thank these games for the fact that every game made today receives a rating. But regarding Night Trap's gameplay, you really only just check security cameras over and over again hoping to catch the masked men, so it gets boring after a minute or two. It's honestly more fun to watch the men attack the house guests, which is literally why the game is so controversial. Sonic Boom: Rise of Lyric. I know I said that Sonic managed to bounce back completely after Sonic 06, but I completely forgot about the fact that this game exists. Released exclusively to the Wii U, the redesigned looks of all the main Sonic characters was not the only thing wrong with this game. Continuing the trend of many other games that we have talked about, Sonic Boom is completely filled with bugs and glitches that are baffling to even say made it into the final product. The game was also a very unorthodox version of a Sonic game, as it focused more on gameplay that did not involve Sonic going insanely fast, but rather having him move at a slower pace and playing almost like a Lego game, but without the Legos. Despite the letdown that this game created, it at least spawned a cult favorite Sonic Boom animated show, which I remember watching a few episodes of when I was younger. Lord of the Rings Gollum. It's funny to think about the fact that coming off of the Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War games came a poorly animated stealth game based on the most defenseless character in all of Middle-earth. I remember hearing almost absolutely nothing about this game before it was released, and when it did, I didn't even think it was a real game. But here we are now. Lord of the Rings Gollum centers around Gollum, surprise surprise, also known as Smeagol, making his way through Mordor and avoiding orcs. The gameplay and story, along with the many bugs and glitches of course, left many gamers very upset about the final project, which caused the developer, Didalact, to issue an apology for the overall quality of the game. However, it turns out that many people actually spotted some fishy stuff going on with their apology, and reports claim that it was actually written using ChatGPT. So, yeah, I really don't think they care about the fact that the game was met with so many poor reviews. Nintendo CDI games. Oh boy, we should all know about these games by now. But for those who may be shocked about the fact that there was actually Nintendo games released on a non-Nintendo console back in the mid-90s, let me give you a bit of a backstory. In the early 90s, Nintendo teamed up with Sony to create a CD add-on for the SNES, but they unfortunately had a falling out during production, although the idea of a CD-based console stuck with Sony, and that is what gave birth to the PlayStation. However, around the same time, Nintendo was also working with Philips on a similar project, and while this was happening, Philips was creating their own video game console called the CDI. Since Philips had a short partnership with Nintendo, they were given permission to develop games using their licensed characters. This spawned 4 games, 3 of which were based on The Legend of Zelda, and the other one was based off of Mario. The Mario game, called Hotel Mario, was a depressing platformer where the goal is to go to these massive hotels run by the Cooper kids and close all the doors in each stage. Yeah, obviously the premise sounds really stupid, and on top of all the cheesy animated cutscenes that played every so often, it faded into obscurity soon afterwards. But of course, now the animated cutscenes were brought into a new light due to YouTube poops.
I hope she made lots of spaghetti! Looks kinda peaceful. How are we gonna find the princess with the power going out? Gee, it's kinda... Hey, you! Get off of my cloud!
Yeah. What's interesting to note, though, is that there was another Mario game being planned called Mario's Wacky Worlds, and it was meant to serve as a sequel to Super Mario World. But due to the CDI's discontinuation, it never saw the light of day. Now onto the Zelda games. The games received titles such as Zelda Wand of Gamelon, Link the Faces of Evil, and Zelda's Adventure. What is interesting is that Zelda's Adventure and The Wand of Gamelon had you actually play as Zelda instead of Link, but that didn't make the games any better. The Faces of Evil and The Wand of Gamelon were side-scrollers which had very broken mechanics and piss-poor design that did nothing but anger those who played it. Zelda's Adventure, on the other hand, was a top-down view like most Zelda games, but suffered from similar issues to the other games. Overall, these games were absolute abominations, and no other games that were released on the CDI could catch the attention of consumers, so Philips ended up discontinuing the console's run in 1998. The Quiet Man. Released in 1952, this romance film starred John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara and followed a boxer played by Wayne who flees the US after accidentally killing an opponent in the ring, and yeah, I'm screwing with you. This point has nothing to do with the movie The Quiet Man, but rather the game that released in 2018. Another product of Square Enix. This was a beat-em-up game that was designed to focus more on story rather than the elements that literally define its genre. It featured live-action cutscenes as well, which is sadly a difficult thing to balance with a fully computer-animated video game, in my opinion, so the fact that they wanted to go forward with this idea must have made it one hell of a task, that they unfortunately did not succeed in, of course. Shortly after the game was released, it was quickly criticized for its boring combat mechanics and the fact that the in-game cutscenes were completely silent due to the main character's deafness. This left players unsatisfied and the replay value of this game ceased to exist. Daikatana. Created by John Romero, this game was meant to be a spiritual successor to Doom and Quake. Romero, of course, was the creator of both Doom and Quake, which both revolutionized the first-person shooter genre, so I bet a lot of FPS fans in the late 90s were super pumped to see what new fun game John Romero could create. However, what's interesting is that this game was developed by Romero's new company, Ion Software, instead of the company that created Doom and Quake, which was id Software. Daikatana was announced for the PC shortly after Romero's Switch, and the first piece of advertisement for it became one of the most controversial game ads ever made. This is fantastic. Unfortunately, Daikatana soon faced multiple delays and was even ported to a new engine during this time. After scrapping their 11 months of work, many employees left Ion Software, and when Daikatana was shown at E3 1999, the demo they presented could only run at 12 frames per second. The game finally released in May 2000 and was met with extremely harsh reviews. It was released on N64 alongside its PC release, and the internal strife that happened with Ion during its creation showed in the final product. Had things gone smoothly, we probably would not be talking about it on this video. Drake of the 99 Dragons. This game was developed by Majesco and meant to spawn a possible franchise with comics and merchandise similar to how Cheetah Man was supposed to spawn its own franchise. But, like Cheetah Man, it flopped due to its bad design. It follows Drake as he seeks to avenge his master's death by venturing through an early 2000s 3D city similar to Tokyo or some other big city in Asia. It uses a third-person perspective that is completely broken with janky controls, poorly animated cutscenes, and frustrating level design that all combine into a miserable experience for those who played it, in the hopes of this game spawning a comic and cartoon series faded into dust. Plumbers Don't Wear Ties. This is probably the most ridiculous entry in this Iceberg, as in all honesty, it barely plays like a normal game. But it's on here, so I gotta talk about it, and there are definitely things to talk about regarding this game. Plumbers Don't Wear Ties was developed for the Panasonic 3DO and heavily utilized its FMV features, which basically means that it almost entirely was in live action. It follows a romance story between a man and a woman who meet under crazy circumstances that involve a perverted boss and some random dude that pops up and scolds you for the decisions you make throughout the game. I know that my description is extremely vague, but that honestly is about as good as I can describe it because this game has pretty much no plot. The only amount of gameplay you get to take part in is picking different outcomes of a certain situation that happens to the characters. But it only happens every so often, so pretty much you're just sitting there and watching for events to unfold. On top of the barely existing gameplay, the graphics, despite being in literal live action, are terrible. 90% of the FMV video are just still shots that switch to show action while audio plays. Only in the beginning and a few other parts of the game do you actually see the image move. The overall existence of this game would not at all be allowed in today's market due to the terrible quality of it. What's funny is that the back of the game's box says that it plays like a game, feels like a movie, when it honestly feels more like watching a softcore porn DVD, but the disc is all scratched up so you can't even see the moving image pop up. I bet even the people who bought this game hoping to get softcore porn out of it were left disappointed. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Everything that can be said about this game has already been said by the Angry Video Game Nerd, so if you want more of an in-depth analysis, go watch one of his 3 main videos about the game. But here is my rundown. The game is based on the classical novel of the same name written by Robert Louis Stevenson, and that fact alone would bring up the question why anyone would want to make a game based on a book that came out over a century before its release. Of course, the character of Jekyll and Hyde would become a staple in the classic horror franchise since there was a film adaptation that was released in 1941. But back to the game. It revolves around Dr. Jekyll walking to his wedding while everyone and everything who crosses his path attempts to kill him. Not only are you literally walking and moving incredibly slow, your only method of self-defense is useless, therefore making the gameplay insanely difficult on top of being slow and tedious. Beating the game would be deemed almost impossible for a long time, that is until AVGN finally made a video showing how it's done. Of course, there were plenty of people who beat the game before this, but since AVGN was most known for his hatred towards the game, it's almost like seeing it be complete for the first time ever. For those who want to try their hand at completing it, don't. As the angry video game nerd put it,
I know, the fact that that game exists is a horrible abomination of mankind. That game is so fucking horrible. And I am not kidding. I am dead fucking serious. Dead fucking serious.
eFootball. This might be the first point that I'm having trouble gathering information. eFootball is a series of football/soccer games designed by Konami and was made for mobile devices. After looking up videos regarding this game, I only found videos of people who were displeased with the most recent FIFA game. I can make the possible inference that the eFootball games have pretty questionable graphics due to the image that goes with this layer on the Iceberg, who I'm assuming is the Argentinian soccer player Lionel Messi. And yeah, it does not look very good. But mobile games have less to work with graphics-wise, so you can't really beat them up that much. For those who are familiar with these games, please let me know if you have any issues with them in the comments. Saints Row 2022. The Saints Row franchise has been around for quite some time now, and though I've never played any of the games, I can guess it feels similar to GTA but with more fantastical elements added to it. Saints Row 2022 came out 7 years after the previous installment and had a lot to live up to in terms of how long fans have been waiting for this game to finally see the light of day, but they unfortunately did not get the product that they hoped for. The four main characters were criticized for their obnoxious personalities, and the gameplay felt way too familiar for a new installment after 7 years. It overall ended up becoming a big disappointment for the Saints Row community, but looking at it as an individual game not related to any other franchise, it would be hard to say that it's legitimately a bad game. Hunt Down the Freedmen. Created using the Source engine, which was used for games like Half-Life and Counter-Strike, Hunt Down the Freedmen was another attempt to create a game that could achieve the same quality and status as the other Source engine games I mentioned. But controversy surrounding the over-the-top development demands and accusations of stolen game aspects plagued its release before people even got the chance to play it. And when gamers finally got their hands on it, they were met with bad graphics, poor storytelling, and a terrible combat/physics system that did nothing but turn off players. So all this, along with its fairly hefty price tag of $25 compared to the Half-Life collection being worth about $35, did not help this game get any more traction whatsoever. Mighty No. 9. What was intended to be a spiritual successor to Mega Man, Mighty No. 9 is a platformer that was crowdfunded through a successful Kickstarter campaign, which kind of sickens me to say because it's such a shame when any sort of media project that gets crowdfunded doesn't end up meeting the expectations that the fundraisers had. After facing many delays, it finally released in 2016, and that's when the disappointment kicked in. Frame rate drops happened constantly, Mega Man style game mechanics were found to be underwhelming, and the level design was very tedious at times. It ultimately lacked any fun aspect that came out of the Mega Man franchise, and Mighty No. 9 faded into obscurity. Fast and Furious Crossroads. With the advent of movies being adapted into video games pretty much becoming a thing of the past now, the Fast and Furious franchise never really got the opportunity to produce a decent video game adaptation, and while the intent to change that may have been present during this game's development, alas, they ended up continuing its decline in quality. Even though I've yet to see a single Fast and Furious movie as of writing the script, I can infer that the action is top-notch, and replicating it in a video game would be a no-brainer. Too bad the designers really did have no brains. Crossroads is short, simple, and unsatisfying, which does not represent the franchise in a good light whatsoever. It ended up failing to meet expectations after being nothing but a rumor for quite some time, and even though a family fun aspect present in the game may be appealing to Dominic Toretto, it unfortunately does not equal to a good quality game. DDI platformers. The very origin of the phrase shovelware may be linked to this company and the games they produced. Data Design Interactive, or DDI, was a British video game company founded in 1983. They were the creators of tons of mediocre video games that came out on multiple consoles throughout their time as a company. One of their most well-known projects that has become notorious in the gaming community was a Wii game called Ninjabread Man, which follows the player controlling a gingerbread man who dresses up as a ninja and fights monsters made out of candy, utilizing the worst controls ever made for the Wii remote. DDI eventually folded in 2012, and in 2020, many of their assets were discovered on discarded hard drives, and of course, they were leaked to the public. Many of these assets have gone undiscovered, but in all honesty, I can care less about a company that produced nothing but bottom of the bargain bin quality games. Rogue Warrior. This is one of those games that is extremely over the top when it comes to how it treats you depending on your style of gameplay. When you choose your difficulty, it mocks you in the most stuck-up way possible. But they had the inclination to make fun of a gamer's way of playing, knowing damn well they did not have a good enough game to back up their insults. The gameplay and controls are insanely janky, the graphics are questionable, and the main protagonist spews so many cuss words that it would make the Duke Nukem games seem like they're made for kids.
Lights out, motherfucker. Rock and roll, motherfuckers, rock and roll. The great leader must have a tiny dick.
Now, in all honesty, after watching these clips, this game is pretty funny when it comes to the amount of obscenities this guy spews out. It's like watching a bad action movie with a main character who can't stop saying ridiculous one-liners. I guess Rogue Warrior just falls into the category of being so bad it's good, but when it comes to it being a video game, the fact that it's so bad it's good does not relate to the overall gameplay whatsoever, but rather the protagonist's personality. Therefore, landing this game on the iceberg. Tomb Raider: Angel of Darkness. The Tomb Raider games were huge in the 90s, and were one of those games that were a must-have on PlayStation. Though, in all honesty, its main protagonist, Lara Croft, was probably more popular than the games itself. She appeared in commercials and other forms of advertisements all throughout her time in the spotlight, and of course, she went on to star in movies as well. Now, you may wonder why she ended up being so big, and I think we might all have an idea why. It doesn't matter how pixelated a female character is in a video game. If she is of the desired body type, with good attributes, she will get plenty of attention from us gamer dudes. Anyways, before I get too deep into this, let me get back to the actual games themselves. After only releasing games on the PlayStation 1, their transition to PlayStation 2 is what gave birth to Angel of Darkness. After the disappointing Tomb Raider Chronicles, the franchise was ready to get back on track with the more graphically powerful PlayStation 2. Unfortunately though, things didn't go as planned. Development on this game was an absolute disaster, and it showed in the final product. Many platforming elements in the game were found to be clunky and way too difficult to get a hold of, and there were graphical errors everywhere. Angel of Darkness ended up becoming a bigger disappointment than Chronicles ever was, and it ended up killing the company who developed it. Of course, now things are a lot more steadier for Tomb Raider, and she does not seem to be leaving anytime soon. Batman: Dark Tomorrow. Before we got the masterpieces that were the Batman Arkham games, many gamers had limited options when it came to good Batman games. There were definitely good Batman games out there, like the original Batman NES game, Batman Returns on Super Nintendo, and the Batman Begins video game. But among these few decent games, the library of Batman games were filled with crap. Games like Batman Forever on Super Nintendo, Batman Return of the Joker on Game Boy, and of course, Batman Dark Tomorrow, which is what we're delving into on this entry. Dark Tomorrow was plagued with the clunkiest controls imaginable, which meant Batman would get knocked down every single time he got punched. These frustrating gameplay aspects were just one of the problems this game had. Poor playing instructions and the fact that Batman actually dies at the end of the story were other issues that were included with this atrocity. Thankfully, we now have the Arkham games, which are absolute masterpieces. Postal 3. Another game using the Source engine, despite the fact that after watching footage of this game, it does not look like any of the most common aspects used in Source engine games are actually present in this one. Postal 3 might be one of the few games in existence that has a loading screen featuring some dude flipping the player off. How fun. Now, in my experience, I believe that this is a good sign that we're in for a real treat. Besides that, one of Postal 3's major criticisms regards its absurd amount of abrupt cutscenes that interrupt gameplay. It's almost like every move you make triggers some kind of cutscene that explains a very simple task that could easily be figured out by the player. This, along with its confusing controls and text boxes that use this very out-of-place font that looks very similar to Comic Sans, gives this game a place on this iceberg. Leisure Suit Larry box office bust. The Leisure Suit Larry series is most known for its very sexual content, and it's been around for almost 4 decades now. As far as I'm concerned, the series has not seen a new installment in years, but that does not mean it will stay like that. But anyways, in 2009, Box Office Bust released, and those who purchased the game had only one word to describe it: awful. Containing everything that has made every game on this list a worthy entry, on topic of comedic dialogue that produces no laughs and nauseating character designs, Box Office Bust pretty much derailed this franchise going forward. Pac-Man on the Atari 2600. Alright, this is the game that I was alluding to in the E.T. entry. Around the same time E.T. on the Atari 2600 released, Pac-Man on the Atari 2600 hit store shelves, and Atari was betting big on its release. Due to it being quite possibly the most popular arcade game on the market at the time, Atari knew that people would be ready to buy it. Now, at this time, about 10 million American families owned an Atari 2600, and Atari was so sure that Pac-Man would be a hit that they decided to produce 12 million copies of the game, and hoping that they would not all just sell out, but that this would also cause more families to purchase an Atari 2600. However, when people finally got their hands on the game, they were met with the most broken, unfinished, saddest excuse for a console port of Pac-Man. The Atari 2600 version of this game had many loud sound effects that irritated players during gameplay, and many of the other character sprites would blink constantly. People who bought the game, along with people who bought ET, were so unimpressed with the game that many people demanded refunds, and sales of the Atari 2600 dropped. It was at this point when Atari realized that there was pretty much no quality assurance when it came to the games they released on their console. As the story goes, many of the unsold copies of ET and Pac-Man, along with many other games, were all recalled and buried in a landfill in New Mexico. There was a whole documentary about this infamous moment in gaming history called Atari Game Over, so for those who are interested in this topic, feel free to check that out. Phoenix Games. Phoenix Games is a Dutch video game company and is famous for their absurd library of games. A lot of people call their game shovelware, similar to DDI, but in all honesty, I don't think shovelware is the correct way to categorize their library. These games are on a whole other level ridiculous, and comparing it to like 50% of the Wii video game library is giving it too much credit. Anyways, Phoenix Games is most known for the absolutely beautiful cover art that accompanies their games, such as Snow White and the Seven Clever Boys, Cinderella, Peter Pan, Pinocchio, and the mythical Packy, which might not even existed. But as you can tell, many of these games were based off of popular Grimm's fairy tale characters that were made popular by Disney, as we all know. Despite the absolutely horrid covers that dawned upon these games, the actual content of these games look nothing like the demonic renderings seen on the cover art. The graphics are almost entirely made in a hand-drawn animation style and feature stupid minigames that would make any sane person lose their sanity after like 10 minutes of gameplay. Also, one more thing to add is that in the Snow White game, one of the Seven Clever Boys was drawn like this. Yeah, that's pretty rough. Family Party 30 Great Games Obstacle Arcade. Remember when I said in the previous point that 50% of the Wii video game library was shovelware? Yeah, this franchise is one of the main reasons why that is the case. The Family Party games are advertised to be family-friendly party games with the most boring and poorly designed aspects that do nothing but try to replicate what Mario Party does. Despite the fact that the majority of their games were made on the Wii, there was one game made for the Wii U, and that game is this one. Obstacle Arcade, which is a subtitle that should not have been included due to its unnecessary length, includes 30 games that can be played with your imaginary family. They're imaginary because no one in their right mind will want to play this game. Even though the cover says the games are great, that adjective is entirely false. All the games are insanely boring and drag on for way too long. On top of having to play boring long minigames, you have to deal with the graphics, which look really crappy for the Wii U. Now, the question remains, what morons concocted this game after releasing several other Family Party games thinking they would actually eventually release something people would want? We may never know. Fighter Within. When Nintendo released the Wii in 2006 with its unique form of motion control, Microsoft and Sony wanted to take a stab at this realm of gaming with PlayStation's Move and, of course, the Xbox Kinect. Unfortunately, these both did not sell very well, but you want to know who did buy a Kinect? My dad. So because of that, I was able to play some Kinect-centered games like Kinect Adventures and Disneyland Adventures. But back to Fighter Within. The game was made specifically for the Xbox Kinect and was actually a launch title for the Xbox One. Obviously it's a fighting game, and with it being compatible for the Kinect, would seem like a potentially cool idea on paper, but like the Kinect itself, it flopped. The game was criticized for its poor and boring controls, and just judging from gameplay, I think I can agree. This game is strictly for the birds. Takashi no Chosenju. Sorry if I butchered that, but that's about as best as I can get from that. Also known as Takeshi's Challenge, this game released on the Famicom in 1986 and developed by Taito. The plot involves this salaryman trying to find treasure in the South Seas. In order to get there, the player literally controls the character as he quits his job, divorces his wife, gets drunk, beats up literal members of the Yakuza, sings karaoke, among many other very fun activities that are totally not out of place for a Famicom video game. To give them credit, it was still the early days of modern gaming, so content like this wasn't really given much regulation on whether they could be released. But back to the gameplay. In order to actually complete these tasks, the game asked the player to do some really weird things in order for it to work. In the karaoke segment, The Famicom actually has a built-in microphone which you must sing into. On top of that, the game will literally judge your singing, and if it finds it to be too lousy, it will ask you to complete the segment again. This is just one of the large amounts of weird things that occur in this very weird game. But in all honesty, at least according to my research, it does not seem like the game is an absolute piece of garbage, and more likely was just a game that attempted to be way ahead of its time. It didn't end up selling well, and many who bought the game quickly put it down as the game failed to deliver any clues on what the player was supposed to do. The Simpsons wrestling and skateboarding. The Simpsons, being the massive property that they are today, have spawned a massive amount of games over the years, going all the way back to the days of the NES. There were a good handful of really solid games that were based off The Simpsons, however, like the Simpsons arcade game and Simpsons Hit and Run. But The Simpsons Wrestling is not one of those games. Released exclusively for the PlayStation 1, The Simpsons Wrestling stars all of the main cast of characters from The Simpsons as they all duke it out to no music whatsoever while a still image crowd watches. Each character has their own unique moveset, however this game falls into the category of having a very unfair character in the roster, which ironically is actually none other than Ned Flanders. Overall, the game clearly seems rushed, and on top of that, it was released right after the PlayStation 2 hit store shelves, so I don't think many people were really hyped for this game. Now onto Simpsons Skateboarding. The music of the opening title already makes a clear message that the quality of the game is only going to get worse. The designs of the characters and open world map look terrible, and in all honesty, it seems the company put more effort into fixing the look of the still image audiences compared to wrestling. Along with a very unneeded character stats element and a myriad of reused assets, that was the nail in the coffin for Simpsons Skateboarding, but thankfully it was followed up by Simpsons Hit and Run. Bomberman Act Zero. During the mid-2000s, the direction of gaming at the time was steering more and more towards darker concepts. Many games that were released during this time period, such as Shadow the Hedgehog and Twilight Princess, all adopted a more gritty tone, which was a major shift compared to the games that came before them in their respective franchises. Hudson Soft wanted to jump onto the dark game concept train, so they started work on a new Bomberman game and completely redesigned him, making him look like a badass robot. But that's as cool as the concept gets for this game. Taking a look at the cover, you would expect this game to be an action-adventure, but it actually plays just like the normal bird's-eye view style that many Bomberman games have had so far, with graphics that look actually way worse than what's presented in the game case. With it being the normal style of Bomberman gameplay, you would assume local multiplayer is also encouraged, but it turns out there's none of that. You're only able to play with others online. You also have the option of doing a single-player mode, along with a story mode, but after everything described, who would want to play this game by themselves? Double Dragon 2 Wander of the Dragons. Korean game company Gravity wanted to revive Double Dragon in early 2013 by taking its basic side-scrolling beat-em-up style and bringing it into the third dimension. It was announced in 2011, then shat onto the Xbox 360 game store after facing delays for 2 years. The one great thing about this game is the fact that it holds the status as being the lowest scoring Xbox 360 game on Metacritic, with a whopping 17 out of 100. What caused them to come to this conclusion was due to the low effort put into the presentation, poor combat, and the broken English that plagues not just the game, but even the description that originally accompanied it on the 360 game store. Google Translate is definitely not helping this game whatsoever. Spyro, Enter the Dragonfly. Spyro has been a staple of the PlayStation since its birth. For its 6th installment, the publishers wanted to desperately get this game released for the holiday 2002 season, much to the dismay of the development team. Of course, situations like this do not mean a good outcome. Many disagreements and time constraints followed, and they were successful in getting it released in 2002, only to be met with very harsh reviews. The game was too short, had lots of technical issues, and did not really bring anything new to the Spyro games. However, this game did not at all derail the Spyro franchise, and the Purple Dragon would continue to get games going into the mid-2000s and eventually became the star of Skylanders, which, like Spyro's solo games, have been dormant for many years. Maybe one day he'll get a brand new game, like Crash Bandicoot did. Bible Adventures. Oh man, this is a classic entry. So back during the days of the NES, there were a few game companies out there creating unauthorized games for it, much to the dismay of Nintendo. One of these companies was called Color Dreams, and for a little bit, they were able to sell their games at most game stores alongside games licensed by Nintendo. But Nintendo soon realized that they weren't making any money off of Color Dreams games, so they sent a cease and desist to all game stores selling unauthorized NES games, so these stores had no choice but to tell these companies making these games that they could no longer sell them. So Color Dreams, with nowhere to sell their games, decided to rebrand it into Wisdom Tree and began reselling their games at Christian bookstores. I remember watching a documentary about retro collecting, and there was a segment where they talked about Wisdom Tree's games. Bible Adventures was apparently sold behind a glass casing at these Christian bookstores that sold them near the front desk. But anyways, on to the actual gameplay. Bible Adventures allows you to play 3 separate stories, such as Noah's Ark, Baby Moses, and David and Goliath. Noah's Ark has you playing as Noah, as he collects 2 of every animal in the map, then putting them into the Ark. Nothing about it is blatantly terrible, it's just a lot of weird mechanics that happen in the gameplay which can get really annoying really quickly. Baby Moses has you carrying Moses throughout multiple levels. The major issue with this game is that you cannot defend yourself when carrying him, and just about everything around you is trying to kill him. Then finally there's David and Goliath. You control David through various levels where he collects sheep, then fights the Philistines, and then eventually fights Goliath. All 3 of these games have their own share of problems, and they also play the same music over and over again. It doesn't change. Regardless, this game will always hold a special place in my heart, as my mom always talked about playing it when she was a kid and talking about how difficult it was. Plus, I totally missed out on buying a $5 copy of it at a local game store. Really wish I bought that when I had the chance. Mega Man X7. After the Mega Man franchise reached its 6th game, Capcom decided to branch off for a short time to start a brand new line of Mega Man games called Mega Man X. Similar to the original Mega Man games, they followed steady numbered sequels and jumped ship from the Super Nintendo to the PlayStation 1 for its 4th installment. However, that 4th installment is what kicked off its gradual downfall in quality. X7 does not even start with you playing as Mega Man. You instead start with this new character named Axel, and then eventually switches to Zero halfway through. You don't play as Mega Man until later in the game, and if that's the case, then it should have been called Axel X7. Anyways, Axel uses an arm cannon similar to Mega Man, however, the developers decided to give Axel a targeting system that basically uses aimbot to lock onto enemies. This takes away from the challenge of the Mega Man games, and along with the flip-flop between 2D and 3D levels which screw up the camera angles often, Mega Man X7 ultimately flopped critically and financially, derailing the franchise. Aquaman, Battle for Atlantis. Aquaman unfortunately did not get the same treatment that Batman and Spider-Man have gotten when it comes to games based off of him. Aquaman Battle for Atlantis is probably one of the most lousiest games ever conceived. It involves Atlantis being attacked by Black Manta and his cronies in order to seek out its treasures. How original. Each mission involves Aquaman swimming around Atlantis looking for guys to beat up while also running into invisible walls placed almost everywhere. These missions were also divided by cutscenes which are literally just pictures with the comic text bubbles. I think I can understand what they were trying to do with this, but ultimately it didn't work. Despite being called Aquaman Battle for Atlantis, it looks to me like there isn't many battles going on in this one. Friday the 13th for NES. For some reason, many rated R movies from the 80s got made into NES games, and Friday the 13th is one of them. I personally have yet to see a Friday the 13th movie, but I am proud to say that I do own a VHS copy of the first movie. But regarding the game itself, it's one of those games that has mechanics that annoy the player but overall isn't a steaming pile of garbage. The game follows camp counselors at Crystal Lake who navigate the camp and kill zombies with rocks. The addition of the rocks as weapons creates an issue, as when the characters throw them, they are thrown in an arc and go straight over the heads of the zombies. On top of that, there is a confusing map system that does not clarify to you whether you are going left or right. Regarding Jason, the player fights him multiple times throughout gameplay, and he progressively loses more and more health after every fight. Also, for some reason, he's wearing a purple jumpsuit in this game, instead of tattered clothes. Overall, this game has a lot of mixed opinions, as some people love it and some people hate it. I guess it's up to the player's interpretation. Rise of the Robots. The 90s gave birth to a massive amount of fighting games, and many of the fighting games that we all know and love today started in this decade. Mirage Studios wanted to get in on the fun, so they started development on their own fighting game called Rise of Robots. It was released on several different consoles, even the 3DO and CDI, and while the graphical abilities of the game was moderately received, the gameplay and presentation was the ultimate thing that ruined this game. The story mode has no balance whatsoever, meaning that if you lose one round, you have to start from the very beginning of the story, and the special moves require a lot of patience as you can't quickly press the buttons and have it happen like in Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. Needless to say, this game was trifled with problem after problem. However, an arcade port was in the works for a little bit and was meant to fix the issues of the console versions. It would have seen a speed boost along with the fighter roster being doubled, but as we know, it never came to fruition. Life of Black Tiger. Originally a mobile game for iPhone and Android, Life of Black Tiger found itself ported onto the PlayStation 4 for reasons unknown. The game revolves around this edgy Black Tiger who was abandoned by his parents, and so he hates everyone. And, well, I would explain the rest of the story if the text box weren't filled with broken English. Look at this crap. Animal called as human is what I dislike the most. They smell bad. Again, Google Translate isn't helping to make this game any better. But then after that, the game starts and the player will be met with the worst graphics ever rendered onto a PS4 game. The human models look hideous, as well as the backgrounds, and on top of the bad graphics, the controls are awful too. The camera's reversed and the tiger moves extremely slow even when holding the run button. Now, how did this mobile game get ported to the PS4 with a $10 price tag on it? Well, I'm not sure, but all I know is that the people who made this are called One Games, but honestly, it would have been better if they were called Zero Games. Custer's Revenge. Okay, this one is going to be pretty hard to talk about, but I will try my best to describe it. But before that, a little history lesson. George Armstrong Custer was an American war commander who served during the American Civil War and the American Indian Wars. In 1876, thousands of Native Americans escaped their reservations, and Custer was ordered to bring them back. In June of that same year, Custer and his men encountered the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne tribes and fought them near Little Bighorn River in Montana. Custer and his men were outmatched and defeated by the native tribes, and this battle is known as Custer's Last Stand to this day. And then, over 100 years later, his likeness was used in a pornographic video game made for the Atari 2600. Custer's Revenge, being a very rated X video game, was sold in a leather casing in order to shield it from younger buyers at game stores, and the actual cover shows a very cartoony Custer who is completely naked, trying to woo a very realistic native woman. But onto the gameplay, which will have to be censored heavily. It involves the player controlling a, very underdressed Custer, walking up to a native woman who is also very underdressed, and, having relations with her, assuming that there was no approval given. And this is how you get points, so yeah. But when this game released in the early 80s, it sparked a crap ton of controversy, which isn't surprising. Many Native Americans, women activists, and parents were outraged by the content of this game. However, at the time, it was the Wild West, because anyone could make a game on Atari and release it, basically meaning there was absolutely no content or quality control enforced on games before they were released. This led to a whole slew of pornographic games being made on Atari, and I really don't know who this was made for, because I can't imagine anyone getting off to these very pixelated characters. Lula 3D. How about let's follow up a pornographic game with another pornographic game with much more advanced graphics? Unfortunately, this one is going to be a lot harder to talk about, seeing as how YouTube will not budge on this kind of content regardless if it is only there for commentary. But anyways, Lula 3D was made for the Microsoft Windows in 2005 and follows Lula, a gentleman's entertainer, as she films adult content and is chased by some big mobster who should belong in every naughty movie ever because he just has that look to him. Just look at this dude. Like, he has the typical villain look. Specifically a villain that's like in some sort of like I don't know, some striptease movie who's really, really into the girl or something. He's got that look. He's him. That's about as much as I can say though for now, but if you want to dive into this wonderful game, go right ahead. Shaq Fu. In the 90s, Shaquille O'Neal was at the top of his game while playing in the NBA, and while many other well-known names in basketball played alongside him at the time, it's easy to say that Shaq was the most profitable out of all of them. He appeared in countless movies and TV shows even to this day, and of course, he started his very own video game called Shaq Fu. Shaq was apparently very enthusiastic about the project, as he was a huge fan of fighting games and gave the developer, Delphine Software, feedback throughout his production in order to make it to his liking. But that feedback unfortunately was not enough, because when Shaq Fu hit store shelves in 1994, the reviews for it were less than positive. The Genesis and SNES versions had major differences, as the SNES version only got half of the character roster as the Genesis version, and the story mode clearly had no effort put into it. If you play as Shaq in the story mode, you get a long ending to it, but if you play as literally any other character, all you get is some picture with a paragraph to go with it. The controls/mechanics also have issues. There's too much jumping going on, and much of the controls don't fit into the fighting game theme, and much rather belongs in some kind of side-scroller. A sequel was planned, but due to poor reception, they canned it, until 24 years later, when the sequel finally came to fruition, only to receive the same criticisms. Hong Kong 97. In the year 1994, Hong Kong 97 would be released in very low quantity on the Super Famicom. It was made by Happysoft as their one and only game, and its release status is an absolute mystery to this day. Many game stores rejected it, and because of that, physical copies of this game have pretty much been rendered non-existent. So the only way people have been able to play this game is through emulators. But I'm not sure why they would want to do that because the content of this game is, well, unable to be described. For some reason, Happysoft decided to add Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan as the main characters in their storyline, which I highly doubt they gave consent to or was even aware of. And literally the opening slide to the story mode has a random F-bomb that comes absolutely out of nowhere. It has no reason to be there. Why is it there? I don't know, I guess maybe they just didn't think it was expressive enough if they didn't use it, but don't ask me. Regarding the story though, it takes place in 1997, where the crime rate of Hong Kong has skyrocketed due to an influx of communists, I think. So they call in Bruce Lee's relative Chin to beat some guys up, I guess. Well, it turns out that Chin, who is literally played by Jackie Chan, was too good at his job and killed about 1.2 billion of the communists, which at the time would actually be the entire population of China. And while this was all happening, in mainland China, a secret project was in progress to resurrect a deceased Chinese leader named Deng Xiaoping and turn him into an ultimate weapon. Yes, that's the actual plot of this game. It's the most insane thing ever conceived. Personally, I find the plot of New York 2017 to be better, and if you know, you know. Anyways, after that long drawn out intro ends, the game starts, and that's when it's revealed to be a 2D shooter, where you get killed in one hit. Oh, and when you get killed, you are shown this image as the game over screen. Yeah, there is a very good chance that might actually be a real dead guy. Anyways, if you keep playing and don't die, you fight Deng Xiaoping in his ultimate weapon form. He doesn't take long to kill, and when you do, it goes back to the 2D style gameplay and repeats for eternity. No wonder this game didn't make it that far. Infestation Survivor Stories. It seems like many game companies at the time wanted to try their hand at an MMO, and that included Hammerford Studios when they created Infestation Survivor Stories for Microsoft Windows. Infestation took on a zombie apocalypse theme and gave single player options where you could hunt zombies, but online multiplayer options allowed you to fight against other players. When this game finally released to the public, players found a slew of issues. There were a crap ton of microtransactions that pretty much were thrown right in your face as soon as you booted up the game. The gameplay was janky as the player looked like it was gliding while moving, and the missions were extremely boring. The game quickly became rated as the worst MMO ever, and the player base quickly dropped. Nowadays, if you pick this game up, you'll most likely find yourself fighting a bunch of NPCs and taking hours to find an online service because no one plays this game anymore. Yaris. In 2007, believe it or not, Toyota felt that making a video game and putting it onto the Xbox 360 arcade library would be a really great advertisement for their company, and according to the track record of sellout video games, I think it would be a great idea too. Yaris follows a line of Yaris cars by Toyota that are bred for combat, and gameplay involves you driving said cars and racing enemy cars while collecting coins. Watching the gameplay, it looks really janky and has that late 2000s Frutiger era look to it, except it's not the cool Frutiger era look, it's more like the late 2000s are weird kind of look. Needless to say, as all sellout games go, Yaris was critically panned and fell into video game obscurity. Captain Novolin. Edutainment games plagued the early 90s to the point where even Nintendo was jumping onto the bandwagon. Out of this ridiculous phase, we got Captain Novolin, which technically is another sellout game, as it is based on Novo Nordisk, who made Novolin, which is a brand of insulin. The game follows Captain Novolin as he travels to rescue Pineville's diabetic mare Gooden from aliens. So yeah, it's a game that teaches the players about diabetes. It was apparently given out for free for kids in hospitals undergoing diabetes-related procedures. When the game starts, you were to put in a code that was given to the doctors, and this code would program the game to include content that related to a certain type of diabetes that the patient may have had. But regarding the gameplay of Captain Novolin, there are segments where you can check your blood sugar, get doses of insulin, and even cameos from diabetic celebrities like Wendy Williams and Carl Winslow showed up. But those cameos could not save this game from harsh criticisms. The game forces you to win each level within a given short amount of time, and that would not be an issue if the gameplay wasn't so clunky. On top of all that, even though it was given for free to young hospital patients, if you bought this as a normal consumer, it was like $50! A cheap game like this needs a cheap price tag, not this crap. The Crow, City of Angels. The Crow was a 1994 comic book movie starring Brandon Lee, the son of Bruce Lee, as a rock star named Eric Draven. It's also worth mentioning that Brandon Lee was accidentally killed on set by a defective gun blank. But back to the movie. Draven and his girlfriend are brutally murdered by a ruthless gang, and Draven's soul is led back to the living by a crow, turning him into an undead vigilante who seeks vengeance against the people who killed him and his girlfriend. With such a cool concept like this, you would think a video game would be made for it, but there were no games for the crow. However, when the sequel, City of Angels, came out, which garnered very harsh reviews, a game was finally made for it, and the quality of it matched that of the movie it was based on. The graphics were hideous, but not as hideous as the controls. Along with it being extremely delayed, it follows very primitive tank controls, where pressing left and right control where you're facing, and pressing up moves you forward, always. Keep in mind, Super Mario 64 was already out at this point, so the tank controls have already been rendered useless at that point. On top of that, the camera angles are terrible, making the controls even worse. There were even fully animated cutscenes throughout gameplay that just reminded the player of how good the game could have been. It's pretty much just a test of patience, as you spend less time figuring out what to do and more time figuring out how to outsmart the controls. Sid the Dummy. Here's another wonderful addition to the Nintendo Wii's insane amount of shovelware games. Here comes Sid the Dummy. It's chock full of poorly animated cutscenes that go on for way too long, and manages to win at creating the most unfun gameplay ever added to a video game. It heavily utilized the motion controls of the Wii, which honestly was the nail in the coffin for Sid. Oh, and also, he keeps saying, "Not just a dummy now, aren't I?" like every 30 seconds, in that same exact way and accent that I just told you. How fun. Popeye 2021. Popeye is an iconic character in American animation history, and he's been around for almost a century at this point. During the early 80s, Popeye was made into an arcade game by none other than Nintendo. In fact, Shigeru Miyamoto originally planned to have Popeye as the mascot for Nintendo, but that plan fell through and now we have Mario. But in 2021, a new Popeye game was made for the Switch and PS4, which looked like it was the result of an overworked sweatshop. The graphics look relatively fine, but the gameplay is so awkward. Very little detail is put into it, and it just seemed all so rushed. The levels are very poorly designed, the tasks it tells you to complete are repetitive because all you do is the same 2 tasks over and over again, and the lack of sound other than the music gives off this vibe that the game was far from complete. Honestly, this is a horrendous game, and personally I can tell that I would absolutely hate to play this myself. The Town with No Name. Released for the Amiga CD32, The Town with No Name, which just says Town with No Name on the front cover, is a point-and-click game with the most over-the-top 90s 3D graphics. You play some nameless cowboy as he arrives at a little old west town and does the most random stuff. Your literal goals involve you going into places and leaving, which progresses the story, and it does not matter where you go, every option works. The voice acting is also terrible, and sometimes the actors stumble on the words like they never memorized the script. It's so bad to the point where you question whether you're actually taking it seriously. The main story ends super abruptly too, when you're gunning down the main antagonist, only for the main character to realize that he was in the wrong town, so they both go to get some whiskey at a bar. The end. What a wonderful story. Godus. Godus is a god video game made for early access on Steam. After a successful Kickstarter campaign, they were able to garner the funds they needed to develop the game in late 2012 and it was released in mid-2013. However, that money unfortunately went down a drain because Godus has gone down in history as the most disastrous crowdfunded game ever created. This is credited towards the large amount of broken promises that plagued its launch and the lack of updates to fix technical issues. The last update was about 8 years ago, and since then, Godus has been pulled from Steam even though it never left early access. In terms of gameplay, it just looks like a generic god game, and a vast majority of the videos for it on YouTube were all uploaded almost a decade ago. I think it's safe to say that this game's player base has fallen off a cliff even before it was pulled from Steam. Vroom in the Night Sky. Released exclusively on the Nintendo Switch just 1 month after its launch in March 2017, Vroom in the Night Sky was developed by Japanese indie game company Poisoft, where you control a girl riding a magical bike in night-themed levels. You perform cool tricks in order to get points, and that's it. This whole game is just performing tricks in different levels and getting points. Now, that may seem similar to a Tony Hawk game, but the content in those games exceed this game astoundingly. The points you get can be used to get more types of vehicles like a plane, a car, and even a freaking couch, but other than that, that's the whole game. It's not god-awful, it just seems boring and it's begging to have more content added to it. On to the next. Okay, for some reason, every time I looked up Bad Rats, it brings up another game called Bad Rats: The Rat's Revenge, and I don't know if that's what the game's referring to, but turns out I found the actual Bad Rats, so we're good. Bad Rats apparently is a physics-style puzzle game, which is odd because the name does not fit that at all in my opinion, but I think it's just some cool adjective for the cool characters, I guess. But when they say bad, they really mean bad. The puzzles are too difficult, and throughout every level, all that plays in the background is this super out-of-place slow country music. Oh, and the 3D models suck, the big one. But the craziest thing about this game is that the overall goal of every level is to literally find a way to kill this innocent cat who is not even doing anything to the rats. When you do solve the puzzle and trigger the death trap, it brutally kills the cat in bloody fanfare. I'm pretty sure that's where the majority of their budget went, and as a fellow cat owner, I disapprove of this game's actions. Dark Castle on the Sega Genesis. This game is a product of every single scary, macabre trope in pop culture all shoved into a blender, and when it was done, it was somehow made into Sega Genesis game cartridges, and that's how we got Dark Castle. This game originally was on Macintosh computers back in the mid-80s, but ported onto the Genesis in 1991. It has absolutely no story and immediately starts the player in a room where you choose where to go. When you do choose a room, it takes you to a platforming section every time. While this all happens, Bach's Toccata and Fugue plays in the background constantly. You know, the piece that goes ba-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da, which is, you know, the cherry on top for the stupid amount of scary movie cliches this game boasts. You have the option of turning off the music, but, oh man, it does not turn off the way it would normally would. Instead, it just sustains the note that it ends on, so if you turn it off when nothing is playing, then no music follows it. But if you do turn it off while it's still playing a certain note, that note will continue to play for eternity. It just sustains. Why does it need to be that complicated? The last thing to know about this game is that there is a room that has graffiti on the walls, and one of the messages says Saddam was here, as in Saddam Hussein. There's another message too that says gamers rule, and it's in the same handwriting. Did he write both messages? Was he a hardcore gamer? Well, that actually would make sense because there was all those rumors that he bought like a couple thousand PlayStation 2 consoles when it first released, so he could rig them together in order to create the most advanced military weapon of all time! Or maybe the game just sucks. Yeah, that's probably it. The Guy Game. Oh man, I really don't know what I was getting into when I wrote this script, but anyways, The Guy Game was released on PS2 and original Xbox, and as the name implies, it's a game for horny guys. The gameplay is basically just watching an episode of some stupid mid-2000s erotic show where dudes with microphones go around to sexy women at a beach and ask them questions when they really just want to sleep with them. After finishing a cutscene, the game will ask you a trivia question, and if you answer right, the cutscene will show the interviewer asking the same question to the babe or babes they are interviewing. It will switch between different women, and if you complete all the questions, the babes get to flash their sensor bars to the camera. Yeah! I think we can all agree that this game sucks. It's not even that sexy, and I don't imagine anyone having a good time trying to get off to this. Spogs Racing. Released for the WiiWare in 2008, Spogs Racing is a generic racing game where you literally race tires, not cars. Just one glance at this game will give anyone insane amounts of boredom. By the looks of it, every map is surrounded by this fog and there is no music that plays at all. There really isn't much left to say about this game, well I mean, other than the fact that it's, you know, slightly better than Big Rigs, because it's functional. It's just a typical game for a specific console, but not sold in physical copies. Where's Waldo for the NES? Where's Waldo is a super popular series of children's books. I personally never got the chance to look at these books when I was a kid because my parents never bought them for me and my siblings, but I did have a friend who had a few, so that's how I became familiar with them. Now, how does a concept like this get made into a video game, specifically for the NES? Well, whoever was put in charge of doing so screwed it up quite a bit. This is what the gameplay looks like. Can you find Waldo? I can't. Not a single figure in this image looks like Waldo, so you're better off just clicking every spot until you get it right. When you do get it right, you still can't find him because the graphics do not help this game whatsoever. Once you complete a level, you get to see Waldo travel from his previous location to the next, but he does not go in a straight line. He just walks all over the place and eventually ends up in some random spot. It's no wonder there weren't any more games made about Where's Waldo. Skylight Free Range 2, Gawk Doing. I might have butchered that, so please excuse me. Now, I think the best way for you guys to understand the atrocity of this game comes down to the trailer, so just watch it. the graphics are horrendous, and this is a game exclusive to the PS4 store. Well, then again, they do have Life of Black Tiger, so I guess it makes sense. Little Britain, the video game. Little Britain was a sketch comedy series from the early 2000s, written and performed by Matt Lucas and David Williams, and financed by BBC. BBC. It follows the two actors as they parody a tour throughout Great Britain and speak to other actors playing everyday characters within the country. And like many TV shows in the 2000s, a lot of them got made into video games for some reason, including Little Britain. A lot of them got made into video games for some reason, including Little Britain. The game allows you to play different levels, which I'm assuming they're based on episodes of the show. The first level is you playing as Matt Lucas dressed as a teenage girl roller skating through a park filled with traffic cones. It's boring and repetitive. Another level has you diving into a pool at the YMCA, I'm assuming, while wearing some over-the-top Speedo. The camera focuses on Matt Lucas bending forward like he's about to take some massive dump, and then the camera starts to spin for some unknown reason. This is just the first couple of levels in this game, and it just gets worse from here. Don't play this game. Like all games based on TV shows, besides Wipeout on the Wii because I played that as a kid and I loved it, this one sucks the big one. Wild Woody. Made by Sega for the Sega CD, Wild Woody is about a pencil, who totally does not have a sexual innuendo for a name, who goes on a quest to stop an evil totem pole who's been shattered into 6 different pieces. The game uses both 3D animated cutscenes, which are terribly made, and 16-bit platformer gameplay. On the topic of sexual themes, even though it has an E rating, this game is definitely not made for kids. Woody heavily resembles male genitalia due to the look of his eraser, which you also use to take out enemies in a very suggestive way. If you collect a certain amount of items in a certain order on a certain stage, you'll get a topless mermaid appear in the bottom left corner with jiggle effects too! On top of all that, there are power-ups scattered throughout the game that cause Woody to grow in size. Yeah, I really do not know what the ESRB was thinking when they chose that rating, and that pretty much sums up the bulk of why this game was panned. Aside from all that junk, it's pretty much just a generic side-scroller, and I can imagine parents took notice of the heavy sexual innuendos in this game, and I can imagine parents took notice of the heavy sexual innuendos this game had shortly after buying it for their children. Hoshiwu Miro Hiro. This game, which I believe translates to Stargazers, was a JRPG made for the Famicom in 1987. What's important to note right away is the fact that this game had such confusing and highly difficult gameplay that many Japanese gamers who played this game soon gave it the nickname Densetsu no Kozoge. I don't really think I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I'll just put it up in text. So you can fact check me there. And this phrase literally translates to legendary crappy game. So we're off to a great start already. Developed by another, Hoshi is heavily inspired by another RPG, which is the 1984 cyberpunk-themed game Psychic City. It follows a post-apocalyptic setting where a supercomputer has driven the human race to near extinction, and you play as one of the few people who were able to resist it. Regarding the gameplay, as I mentioned before, it's extremely difficult. For example, during the start of the game, you're given a map without any explanation of what to do with it, and the entrance to the first town that you need to visit is not displayed on the map at all. Sounds like poor design to me. And just looking at these clips, it just looks like a clone of Final Fantasy on the NES, so it did not take long for Stargazers to fall into obscurity. Alf for the Sega Master System. Alf was a super popular comedy series in the 80s about an alien puppet who crash lands on Earth and is taken in by the Tanner family. Alf adapts to Earth while living there and attempts to eat their cat Lucky as well. Then came the Sega Master System game, and that's what we're talking about now. It involves Alf looking for parts that he can use to fix his ship while avoiding members of the FBI, which is a plot very similar to E.T. on the Atari 2600. Also, almost everything in this game kills you, which is one of the main reasons why this game is so panned. It becomes way too challenging at times, and the lack of a health bar will make any gamer quit immediately. So, maybe just watch the show, don't play the game. Uriel's Chasm. This entry might just have one of the weirdest plots ever made for a video game. So, basically, Uriel's Chasm involves 2 real-life girls who claim they found some long-lost Bible game and are going to review it together. Yeah, no joke. Literally, when you start this game, you get this random clip of these 2 chicks who call themselves the Shovelware Queens talking to the player as they describe this game that they found. It's the most out-of-place start to a video game ever, and it looks a lot like some cringy video 2 friends made in like 2010 or something. But after that, the game finally starts and you get a Bible quote loading screen, which is followed by a very boring cutscene with voice acting that is just as boring. You then learn afterward that the main character is a space nun. Yes, I am serious. Her name is Sister Tabitha, and she's been sent to investigate a space monastery. Then the game starts and pretty much just becomes a where the hell do I go kind of game, like a lot of other 8-bit games. You also have a health bar which is called Faith, and you get more faith by collecting Bibles. Overall, this game seems like it was just trying to satirize everything Wisdom Tree did, and honestly, they succeeded because it just sucks as bad as their games. Genso Saiyuki Super Monkey Daiboken. Genso Saiyuki is similar to Hoshi Wu Mirohito, as it also shares the same nickname that is the Japanese phrase for legendary crappy game. You play as the entourage for a monk who embarks on a journey with allies, obviously, and that's about as comprehensible as the plot gets because, as many people agree, the game is deemed to be anything but comprehensible. It is an RPG, and many people describe it to be similar to Dragon's Quest, as the gameplay involves the player navigating a world while it throws random battles at you constantly. What makes this game so disliked comes down solely to how poorly this game was programmed. The overworlds are ugly, the battles are too confusing, and the loading screens go on for way too long. It's ironic how this game is actually based on a well-known Chinese piece of literature called Journey to the West, when it never got anywhere near Western audiences, at least not until today's time. Digital Homicide. Digital Homicide is actually a game developer and not a single video game, and what's funny to know is that their headquarters were located in Yuma, Arizona, which is the state that I reside in. On top of that, Yuma is a pretty small town and it's located on the borders of Arizona, California, and Mexico, making it an odd choice to locate a video game company's headquarters. But back to the company itself. It was founded by brothers Robert and James Romine, and what is odd is that Robert used to be a liquor salesman before starting the company, but hey, you gotta make money somehow. At a rapid pace, they made a bunch of PC games which included such notable classics like The Slaughtering Grounds, Gnarl Tooth's Revenge, Krog Wars, Paranormal Psychosis, Temper Tantrum, and Wyatt Derp. I don't really know what that last one's supposed to be. I don't know why they chose that. It's a dumb name. Remember those games from your childhood? Because I don't. By the way, these poorly designed games were not even originally made by the founders of Digital Homicide, because they actually bought assets and recycled them in order to create their games, all for the sake of making money. It gets even more interesting when Jim Sterling, a game critic on YouTube, played some of Digital Homicide's games and made reviews on them. Digital Homicide made a response video on their own channel and slapped a copyright claim on Sterling's video. Way to go. Pushing away feedback is 100% a good way to get better your craft. This scuffle led to Sterling's video being taken down and then reinstated, and after more heated debates between the two parties, Digital Homicide decided to go to freaking court in order to sue Sterling for defamation and lost profits. This all came to a head when Valve got involved, decided that it was best to remove Digital Homicide's games from Steam, and call it a day. And I couldn't agree more with the decision. Sonic Jam for Gamecom. Tiger Electronics was a electronic company known for the ridiculous amount of Game & Watch style handheld games that they made throughout the late 80s and well into the 90s. In 1997, Tiger released the Gamecom, which was meant to compete against the Game Boy and Game Boy Color. Needless to say, it flopped and was discontinued after 3 years. But throughout their time developing their Game & Watch style handhelds, a few Sega titles were made into Tiger Electronic handhelds, and their partnership continued into the Gamecom's advent, which is how we got Sonic Jam. It isn't to be confused as being the same game for Sonic Jam for the Sega Saturn, but like its home console equivalent, Sonic Jam for the Gamecom is a compilation game. It only features zones from Sonic 2 and 3/Knuckles, however the layouts are very different. With only 2 games put into one small cartridge, anyone would assume that it would not do well, and they would be right. Sonic Jam for Gamecom is credited as being one of the worst Sonic games ever made. It has monochromatic visuals, poor gameplay, and repetitive music that ruined the experience for most players, and along with the console released on, Sonic Jam failed to captivate audiences. Dark Years. Here comes another crappy Steam game made by a company from Iran that details a very pivotal historical moment. Dark Years covers the true events that occurred in the 1950s when the CIA planned to overthrow the democratically elected government of Iran in order to remove their leader and secure the rights to their oil. The plan worked, but ultimately created more problems for Iran, and all these events are what Dark Years is based on. It sounds extremely promising, especially since the company developing it is from Iran, but unfortunately, despite the interesting story topic, this game failed to succeed as it was played with copious technical issues which included outdated graphics, impossible gameplay, and terrible voice acting. It sucks to see such an ambitious project fall so flat. Fight for Life. Oh boy, here's another fighting game, can't get enough of these. Fight for Life was made for the Atari Jaguar and was actually the last game Atari developed for the Jaguar. Seeing the rising popularity of 3D fighting games in the mid-90s, they wanted to create a Hail Mary video game that could possibly turn some heads towards their console, so they made this only to get the opposite of a Hail Mary. The graphics are terrible, while the controls are clunky. The characters are also weird and forgettable, and according to the story, they're all supposed to be dead, ripping off eternal champions, and must fight for their life, hence the name. Of course, the player would not know that unless they read the manual, which most likely reflects how lazy the programming for this game was. Enough said. Streatham Hill Stories. What do you get when some random foreign game company tries to capitalize on the craze of Grand Theft Auto? This game is the answer. Streatham Hill Story is an abysmal excuse for a video game, and the developers clearly spent way too much time trying to make it like GTA, and barely any time trying to make the graphics look any better than an Atari Jaguar game. Just look at the environments, they suck. Who thought this would pass? No joke, everything about this game just tries so unbelievably hard to copy GTA in every way possible, even down to how when you start a mission, the screen goes black, and all you can see are the text that spells out the title of the mission. That's just the tip of the iceberg for this ridiculous piece of media that tricks so many clueless Steam players into buying. Imagine when Rockstar finally allows GTA 6 to exist, and when you tell your parents how much you want it, they're so out of touch and poor, so they get you this crap. Well, then again, I don't think a lot of parents would buy their kids a Grand Theft Auto game unless they really don't care about the stuff that gets put in their brain. In the meantime, this one's a hard pass. Flowers Are Dead. Our final PS4 exclusive game on this iceberg is none other than this gem. You know that this game is not going to go well when even the trailer gets harsh criticism. Loading up the game gives the player a title screen that just screams we've barely put enough effort into this. Gameplay wise, it's a first person story game that follows our main character, Evelyn, and from the description that I got, it says that she must, and I quote, face her tribulations, delve deep into her mind, trace down the one that got away, and live through your memories. Unsure about what this all means because it just gives little to no context. As the game progresses, it immediately becomes extremely boring as all you do is walk. You can't run, all you do is walk. I really don't know what Sony's deal is with these weird games that they keep putting into their store, like this one and the ones that I mentioned before. Being the juggernaut in gaming that their extremely fanatical fans claim to be, you would assume they would do better, but no, we get games like this every now and then. Yay. War of the Three Kingdoms. This one might be hard to dissect as there is very vague info on the internet about this game. War of the Three Kingdoms is available on Steam, and it does not even look like it has a proper Google page for it when I look it up. From the looks of it though, it seems like a turn-based or real-time strategy game, however all the dialogue and images on Steam are all in Chinese. The reviews don't seem to give any damning notes as to why it sucks, but they are all mostly negative. However, there was this one review that gave it a thumbs up, and it reads, "Before I played War of Three Kingdoms, I had a small peepee, no friends, no GF, depression, and no life. These things haven't changed, but the game is pretty good." Wow, thanks sugar baby. I'm glad you liked it, and I hope your life changes for the better, dude. Fur Fun. Originally known as Cupid Jazzy, Fur Fun started its life as a Kickstarter campaign like most of the games on this list. The developers were heavily inspired by the Banjo-Kazooie games and wanted Fur Fun to follow a very similar formula to them. Now, if you're aware of the whole idea of reviving Rareware-style games and using a Kickstarter to initiate development, then you might be familiar with another game that was heavily inspired by Banjo-Kazooie that also started as a Kickstarter campaign, aka Yooka-Laylee. Both games have very similar stories, and pretty much everyone accused Cupid Jazzy as being a direct copy of Yooka-Laylee, and people even noted that they reused some of their promotional material on their website. Needless to say, the Kickstarter failed, however, it was saved by a Spanish YouTuber named Dallas Reviews when he bought the assets and released the game under the name Fur Fun. Now onto the gameplay. It clearly has had little effort put into it, and comparing it to Yooka-Laylee, it becomes very obvious. I mean, just look at when the main character hits this enemy. Now, compared to something like Banjo-Kazooie. Yeah. Of course, the issues with this game consist, as Dallas Reviews began slapping copyright claims on the many YouTubers criticizing the game, sounds familiar, and even the original composer for Banjo-Kazooie was tied to the game, but left. However, the team at Fur Fun claimed that he was lying. It's a whole fiasco, and I won't be getting any more into it, but you guys are more than welcome to jump into the craze. Top Banana. Oh geez, this one is weird. Top Banana was made for many obscure consoles and computers, such as the Amiga and Atari computers. It's a platformer with the weirdest, most distorted graphics I've ever laid my eyes upon, and they do not match the front cover at all. The music is just weird ambient noises that sound super eerie, and the screen jumps up and down at random, and the ending is seriously one of the most out of place things I've ever seen. It just shows this depiction of a clown that sits in silence for a few seconds, then immediately starts laughing. It's freaking creepy. That's about everything I can say about this game besides asking the question of why does this exist? And who thought Top Banana would be a good name? The idiots who made this, apparently. World Cup Carnival. Now, I'm no soccer fan, or football if you prefer, but I know a little bit of the World Cup and how it occurs every 4 years, like the Olympics. And, well, election year as well. World Cup Carnival is made for the ZX Spectrum and Commodore 64 and allows you to play as almost any team competing in the World Cup that year. And that's about it. I don't know of any crazy stories regarding this game, and it honestly just looks like some generic sports game with very primitive graphics. Chances are it isn't worth a pickup, so no need to try it out if you're interested. On to the next one. Human Killing Machine. The last fighting game on this Iceberg is finally here, and its uniqueness lies in the partnership that its publisher, US Gold, had with Capcom. US Gold worked with Capcom to port the original Street Fighter to home computers, and were even convincing them to create a sequel using assets from the first game in hopes that they could port it to home computers again and make some money off of it. Capcom decided not to go down this path, so they cut their ties with US Gold and started working on the sequel from scratch, and that of course is how we got Street Fighter 2. So, US Gold decided in retaliation to make their own fighting game, which became Human Killing Machine. HKM followed a very similar story to Street Fighter, with the martial artist being the main character and traveling to different countries to fight other people, and eventually leading up to some big final boss. Oh, and you also fight animals too. Yes, in the Russia and Spain levels, you fight a dog and a bull. Honestly, I kinda love it. Regardless though, this game is extremely uninspired and tries way too hard to be like Street Fighter. However, it was early into the fighting game craze, so there can be a tiny bit of credit that can be given. Cassette 50. Apparently there were companies trying to capitalize on Action 52's formula of combining a bunch of cheaply made arcade-style games into one big game, and this is how we got Cassette 50. This game was made for a handful of consoles and computers that barely anyone owned, such as the VIC-20 and Dragon 32/64, and apparently was only available in the UK. While I mentioned that it was similar to Action 52 in content, when it comes to price, you could probably buy a whole bathtub full of Cassette 50s for the price of one CIB Action 52, making Cassette 50 probably one of the cheapest games available to buy today. Gameplay wise, it's a mammoth to talk about, similar to Action 52, however some argue that Cassette 50 is actually worse than Action 52 regarding gameplay, and it would be hard for me to agree because I have no real way to determine myself, so if any of you happen to own a copy with the consoles it plays on, then let everyone know in the comments. Squidge for the ZX Spectrum. Many argue this game is the worst game ever made for the ZX Spectrum, and it shows. Squidge is probably the strangest game I've ever come across in terms of gameplay, and it must be explained. In Squidge, you play as this paper bird that cannot move. Yes, you are unable to move in this game. There are controls in the game menu that tell you can move, but you obviously cannot. How can a broken, unplayable game like this be released? Well, turns out there is a way to move and progress the game. You gotta use cheats. Yep, however they're called pokes for some reason. If you enter the correct cheat, Squidge can move, in the slowest, most boring pace I've ever seen. When he finally exits the start room, you soon find out that this is just a big maze game where you kill enemies in order to progress. Your overall goal is to find some sort of treasure that you need, and this is honestly one of the most tedious games ever created, but somehow I've never heard of it. Probably why it's so low on this Iceberg. Hair Razor. Well, looky here, the last 3 games in this Iceberg are all available on the ZX Spectrum. Guess I can understand why they're so unknown. Anyways, Hair Razor was actually released in 2 different parts, with the first one being Prelude and the second being Finale. Therefore, you had to purchase both games in order to finish the story. This game might be the puzzle game of all puzzle games, because it's just a game about solving riddles. Apparently, a contest was held by the developers to see who could solve the riddles, and whoever could solve them would be awarded £30,000, which is the equivalent to almost $40,000 US. The gameplay consists of the player pressing the arrow keys to switch to the next riddle. That's it. That's all you do. Oh, by the way, turns out that no one has solved the riddles in this game to this day, because they're all deemed to be unsolvable. A lot of people today say that this game is actually the first ever scam created in gaming history, but its obscurity has kept it from being seen by so many people, and maybe one day, someone will stumble upon these games and finally solve the riddles of Hair Razor. And that was my take on the worst video games Iceberg. Despite their low quality, these games have created legacies through the advent of the internet, and many people have become very well known on this platform due to their existence. Now, since my last video, it's obviously been a while. I've been pretty busy with school and all that kind of stuff, as well as work, these past couple of months. But now things are a lot more stable and I have more time to work on this kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm going to be pumping out more videos all throughout the summer, and hopefully you guys will stick around for that. And yes, I understand that people weren't really thrilled with the Goosebumps video, and here's my, another Iceberg video. I'm going off script right now, but yeah. So I've done a lot more extensive research, and I understand that some people weren't really thrilled with how I treated the Goosebumps Iceberg. But hey, I mean, this is a topic I'm much more familiar with, and it kind of shows. So, but yeah, anyways, guys, hope you guys enjoyed this. Like I said earlier, I'm planning on making more videos, possibly another retrospective style video, and maybe another Iceberg video. So yeah, hopefully you guys will stay tuned for that. And well, thank you all for watching, and I'll see y'all later.